There is a kind of departure that unsettles more than a storm. It does not come with the violence of slamming doors, with shouts echoing down hallways, or with the drama of bridges set on fire. It does not leave behind broken glass, torn letters, or the obvious ruins people expect when endings arrive. No, this one is quieter, far more subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. At first it may look harmless, even insignificant, as though nothing has really shifted. You may still sit in the same chair, answer in the same tone, even smile at the same moments. But beneath that surface, something irreversible has already occurred. A withdrawal has begun, not of your body, but of your spirit. A vanishing that cannot be seen, yet can be felt with unnerving intensity. It begins in small refusals, when you no longer leap at every demand, when you no longer bend under every weight, when you stop rushing in to put out fires you never lit. Then it deepens. You no longer lend your strength to patch up their chaos, no longer volunteer your peace as the price for their survival. And suddenly the role you once played, the role they quietly depended on, the role they built their very stability around begins to dissolve. To them it feels like abandonment, but in truth it is liberation. You are no longer available as the silent container for storms that were never yours to weather. This kind of silence is not neutral. It is not passive. It does not simply drift into the background like white noise. No, this silence clings. It follows. It unsettles. It lingers in the air like smoke after a fire, proof that something burned even if no one saw the flames. It is the silence that crawls under the skin because it cannot be confronted, bargained with, or undone. It becomes heavier than presence itself haunting, precisely because it is untouchable. They cannot argue with it. They cannot charm it back. They cannot demand it to soften. And so they are left alone with what they fear most, themselves. Carl Jung, the Swiss thinker who wandered through the most hidden corridors of the human psyche, once suggested that much of what we claim to see in others is nothing more than what we cannot admit in ourselves. But what most miss is the dangerous edge of that idea. For the moment you refuse to carry someone else's projection, the fragile architecture of their illusion begins to collapse. The stories they told themselves about you, about love, about dependence, about who they are and who they are, not those stories disintegrate the moment you step away from the script they assigned you. They lose not only you, but the shield you provided, the shield that kept them from staring into the raw mirror of their own reflection. And when you step out of that role, when you quietly withdraw the life they leaned on without gratitude, you do more than leave you expose them. You strip away the disguises they spent years hiding behind, and suddenly they are naked in front of the truth they never wanted to face. That realization is the beginning of the quiet exit. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't need spectacle to announce itself. It begins in stillness, almost unnoticeable, with the smallest acts of refusal. You stop explaining your every move as though your existence needed justification. You stop apologizing for taking up space, for breathing, for existing as you are. You stop rushing in to repair fractures you did not cause. Stop bleeding yourself dry to heal wounds that were never carved into your own flesh. And suddenly, to those who relied on your silence, your absence feels like violence. They call it betrayal. They label it cruelty. But in truth it is only clarity, a clarity they cannot endure. Because what really terrifies them is not your withdrawal, but the discovery that their comfort was always built upon your collapse. Carl Jung once warned, "Whatever you fail to make conscious will rule your life, and you will call it fate." Empaths, sensitive souls, the ones born with a dangerous gift for feeling too much, know this curse all too well. They do not merely listen, they absorb. They live under the gravitational pull of other people's shadows, confusing borrowed despair for their own heartbeat. They carry the weight of unspoken regrets, of festering fears, of disappointments never theirs to claim. They become living vaults for secrets no one else can bear to hold. And the more they absorb, the more invisible they become. To the world they appear as saints, gentle, patient, endlessly giving. But inside, they feel like shadows of themselves, hollowed out by burdens they were never meant to carry. And yet, there comes a breaking point, a turning, a moment when the soul whispers the one word that changes everything: enough. This is where individuation begins, the terrifying, unglamorous process Jung described as becoming whole. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is not rejection for the sake of pride. It is the slow, frightening, necessary act of no longer abandoning yourself. At first, it feels like betrayal, because for so long you survived on the illusion that usefulness was love, that indispensability was safety. You convinced yourself that as long as you were needed, you would never be discarded. And so, when you stop being useful in the ways they demand, when you finally reclaim your time, your energy, your essence, it feels as though you are breaking an ancient pact. And in truth, you are. You are ending the unspoken contract that said, "I will diminish so you can thrive. I will bleed so you can feel whole. I will vanish so you can remain visible." The rupture is not loud, but it is seismic. It is the kind of betrayal that is not of them, but of the false self you built to keep them comfortable. Notice what happens when you withdraw. Watch closely, because the reaction tells you everything. Those who once drained you the most are the first to tremble. Their voices sharpen, their tone shifts, their words drip with accusation. Suddenly you are different. Suddenly you are cold. They whisper that you've changed, as though change were a crime. But what really shifted was never you. It was the steady supply of free labor, the endless current of your emotional energy that once flowed without conditions. Your silence becomes unbearable, not because silence is cruel, but because it is a mirror, and a mirror terrifies those who've spent years avoiding their own reflection. You are not punishing them. You are not seeking revenge. What you are doing is far more dangerous. You are refusing to shield them from themselves. And this is why the quiet exit feels, to them, like an act of violence. It is not. It is survival dressed as disappearance. For the first time, they are forced to carry the very burdens they once slipped into your hands without hesitation, the grief they outsourced, the chaos they disguised as need, the weight they never learned to lift. Now it all comes crashing back upon them, and without you as the cushion, they must finally taste the cost of their avoidance. Some will rage. They will hurl their anger at you, because anger is easier than accountability. Some will disguise their desperation in sweetness, suddenly showering you with counterfeit tenderness, empty promises, exaggerated kindness, gestures that smell of performance rather than truth. They will beg you back, not out of love, but out of hunger. They do not miss you. They miss the function you played. But if you have walked this path long enough, your eyes sharpen. You begin to see through the theater. The mask no longer fools you. Their words sound hollow, their gestures transparent, their attempts at seduction fragile in the light of your awakening. And then comes the loneliness. A loneliness so sharp it cuts like a blade, precise and merciless, carving through every illusion you once clung to. Because when you stop being consumed by the broken, when you refuse to serve as the endless reservoir for the wounded, something strange happens. A vacuum opens up. The constant noise that once filled your days, the pleas, the crises, the endless currents of other people's pain falls silent. And in that silence you meet yourself, often for the first time. At first it feels unbearable. The quiet presses down on you with the weight of stone. Everything feels hollow, empty. The air itself seems too still, as if the world has forgotten you exist. In those moments, doubt creeps in like smoke. You wonder if you have miscalculated, if the comfort of being used, of being needed, was safer than the sharp ache of standing alone. The silence of solitude can sound louder than any crowd, ringing in your ears like a judgment. It whispers temptations. Go back, apologize, make yourself small again, re-enter the cage you just escaped. Because at least inside the cage, you were never this alone. And yet, beneath that terror lies a deeper truth. This loneliness is not punishment, it is passage. It is the threshold every soul must cross before it can be reborn. It is the desert before arrival, the night before dawn, the death before resurrection. The ache you feel is not emptiness, it is space. Space that was once suffocated by everyone else's shadows, now cleared so that something new, something truer can take root. That solitude, brutal as it feels, is sacred. It is the dark soil where your true self begins to take root. At first, the growth is imperceptible, but slowly something new takes shape. Your empathy, once a curse that bound you to the wounds of others, sharpens into discernment. You no longer drown in every wave of emotion that touches you. You learn to float, to swim, to let the waters move through without pulling you under. You learn to give without dissolving, to listen without losing yourself, to carry compassion not as a chain, but as a sword. And in this refining fire, a truth is revealed. Love was never meant to be sacrifice. Love in its purest form is not the erasure of self, but the recognition of self in another and in yourself. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say is that this privilege rarely comes wrapped in applause. More often, it arrives with suspicion, judgment, and exile. To become yourself is to step outside the script others wrote for you, and few will forgive you for discarding the role they depended on. They will not celebrate your quiet exit. They will not call it growth. Instead, they will dress it in darker words: cruelty, selfishness, betrayal, abandonment. They will say you've changed, as though staying trapped in their design was virtue. They will speak of your absence as violence, because they cannot admit that what really hurts them is not your departure, but the end of their access. But the truth is, it is none of those things. It is not cruelty. It is not abandonment. It is not selfishness. It is clarity. It is survival. It is the decision to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to stop cutting themselves open and wiping the mess on you. It is the moment you realize that martyrdom is not love, that being indispensable is not the same as being cherished. For years, perhaps you mistook exhaustion for intimacy, sacrifice for devotion, usefulness for belonging. But then something breaks. You begin to see that every drop you gave away only deepened their hunger, that your endless giving taught them not gratitude, but entitlement. And so you leave not with noise, not with revenge, but with the quietest weapon of all, refusal. Refusal to keep playing savior in someone else's tragedy. Refusal to carry the pain they will not face. Refusal to stay small so others can remain comfortable. They will twist this into betrayal, but it is not betrayal of them. It is betrayal of the false self you once wore to keep them pleased. And if that betrayal is the price of becoming who you truly are, then it is not only a privilege, it is freedom. The quiet exit is not about revenge. It is not about punishing, correcting, or teaching anyone a lesson they refused to learn. It is about something far more intimate. It is about refusing to live as a shadow in your own life. It is about reclaiming the space that was always yours, but that you were conditioned to shrink from. It is about discovering the brutal truth that you were never loved for your silence. You were exploited for it, rewarded only when you muted your own voice, your own needs, your own becoming. And once that truth pierces you, there is no going back. You cannot unknow it. You cannot unsee how often your generosity was mistaken for obligation, how often your patience was interpreted as permission, how often your love was measured only by how much of yourself you were willing to erase. So when you vanish without slamming doors, without desperate monologues, without the spectacle of rage, understand you are not punishing them. You are protecting yourself. You are reclaiming sovereignty over your own existence. Your withdrawal is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the moment you finally recognize that martyrdom is not love, that silence is not peace, and that shrinking for the comfort of others is a betrayal of the deepest order. And in that stillness, in that radical refusal, something extraordinary happens. You begin to embody the most subversive form of power, untouchability. They cannot manipulate what they no longer have access to. They cannot distort a presence that has withdrawn into its own center. Your absence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the void they once tried to fill with your life force. Your silence becomes a revolution, an uprising against every invisible contract that demanded you disappear for their survival. And then comes the revelation. The most devastating revenge was never revenge at all. It was peace, not the fragile peace others hand out like favors, not the temporary calm bought with your silence, but a peace that comes from the marrow of your own being, a peace that cannot be bargained with because it is not for sale, a peace that cannot be stolen because it does not live in anyone else's hands, a peace that does not seek permission because it was never theirs to grant. It is the kind of peace that unsettles more than conflict, because conflict at least offers a stage, a script, a back and forth. Peace offers nothing, no entrance, no exit, no weapon to grasp. It leaves no opening for battle. It leaves only truth. And truth is the most terrifying force of all. For in that truth you no longer bend, you no longer justify, you no longer explain. You are no longer on trial in a courtroom built by those who thrived on your guilt. You stand beyond reach, and it is this distance that unnerves them, because they cannot lure you back into the cycle, cannot bait you with guilt, cannot tempt you with false tenderness. You have withdrawn your consent to be consumed, and in doing so, you have become something they cannot touch. In that silence, you become unreachable. In that clarity, you become untouchable.